Hundreds of families in South Africa are still asking the same question. When will perpetrators of crimes during apartheid be brought to justice? Now, back in 1996, South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission set out to uncover human rights violations under white minority rule. The TRC referred about 300 cases to the authorities for further investigation. But almost 3 decades later, only a handful have gone to court. We're talking about cases of torture, murder, and enforced disappearances. Now, earlier this year, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a new commission of inquiry to investigate whether there were deliberate efforts to block the investigation and prosecution of these crimes. In his words, for many years, there have been allegations of interference in these cases. This alleged interference is seen as the cause of an unacceptable delay in the investigation and prosecution of brutal crimes committed under apartheid. This has caused the families of victims great anguish and frustration. All affected families, and indeed all South Africans, deserve closure and justice. Our South Africa correspondent Diane Hawker met with one such family struggling to heal.
Edgar Mushwana knows the pages of this book inside out. It contains the story of how his cousin, Ignatius Mthebule, was disappeared by apartheid police in 1987 after meeting a government spy who was posing as a friend.
But here she did actually confess to the author, Jonathan, as to what she did, how she caused Iggy to disappear.
Ignatius Mthebule was an ANC underground fighter who helped plan operations against the apartheid state. He was only 32 when he disappeared. 38 years later, his family still yearns to know his final resting place.
What happened? We just want to be shown that this is where maybe they buried him, so that we can go and take the remains, repatriate them, go and put them where they belong amongst his people.
Some of that torture, what
After the end of apartheid, the world watched as South Africa's newly founded Truth and Reconciliation Commission sought answers to human rights violations and offered amnesty to perpetrators who fully disclosed their role. The commission ruled that those who didn't tell the full truth of their involvement in apartheid crimes would be denied reprieve. It also found that those who didn't come forward should face justice. The TRC referred 300 cases for prosecution, and many of the families thought this meant that these cases would make their way through the court system. But 27 years after the commission closed its files, only half of these cases have been considered for investigation, and only 14 have made it to court, either as inquests or for prosecution. That's why 25 families, including Ignatius's relatives, filed a lawsuit to compel the South African president to set up an inquiry into the delay in the investigations and prosecutions of the cases. Before it went to trial, Cyril Ramaphosa agreed to establish a commission. This theatre will be the main staging ground for public hearings. The aim? To find out whether senior government officials and politicians stopped the investigations from going ahead. The commission has been given 6 months to complete its work, with the power to compel anyone to appear.
While we do have the power to subpoena anyone, including former politicians or current politicians, it is a power and privilege that we would not want to exhaust as the first line of call, but we would want to rely on their conscience and their generosity to contribute immensely to the work that we are set to do.
The families of those affected by apartheid will be watching the inquiry closely, aware that time is running out.
His mother wanted to know. She always wanted to know what happened to her son, and she passed on without knowing.
Many believe that until these cases are finally prosecuted, South Africa will not be able to move on from its apartheid past.
For more on this, let's bring in Siseitu Holomisa from the Foundation for Human Rights. That's an NGO that was established to address the legacy of apartheid. They've been looking into the unfinished work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC. Hello, Siseitu. Welcome to DW News Africa. It's a very serious issue we are dealing with here. Hundreds of families of those affected by apartheid are still seeking justice that has been delayed for decades. Time is running out. Why do you think justice has taken so long for so many people?
Thank you so much for having me on behalf of the Foundation for Human Rights. That question is on the back of all of our heads and is the reason why we have brought litigation against the government of South Africa, is to really answer this, is why has justice been delayed and who is behind it? We are alleging political interference, and we're hoping that the Commission of Inquiry that was recently established will give us more answers as to who and why.
Right. So you suspect some sort of foul play? Is that what I'm sensing?
Correct. And it's not really a suspicion. It's no longer a dispute that there was political interference that led to the government and the NPA not investigating or prosecuting TRC cases that were handed over. And this evidence has been uncovered in previous cases, but the full reasons behind the suppression of TRC cases is still unknown. And we're still trying to figure out who the sources of such interference were.
Right, which is why, as you mentioned earlier, President Cyril Ramaphosa earlier this year established a commission of inquiry into the delay in investigation and prosecution of TRC cases. But there are those that are thinking, instead of another commission, why not just go ahead with the prosecutions promised by the National Prosecuting Authority, NPA?
Thank you for that. And we understand that there's commission fatigue, but it is the available tool for us to unearth the systemic issues such as political interference. And the reason for the delays is that political interference. So we can't push for that as we already have. And now we're trying to uncover the reasons behind these delays so that these investigations and prosecutions can move forward. And I know a lot of people feel very wary about Commission of Inquiries, but they have investigative powers that courts don't, and they have more flexibility in how they navigate in terms of transparency and also allowing for greater victim participation, which is essential in this case.
Right. I mean, one of the reasons I'm asking this is that in the meantime, right, victims' families are aging, perpetrators are dying. Each year that passes means fewer chances for justice. So if such severe crimes can quietly expire without consequence, what message does that send about accountability today?
That sends a message of impunity. In its latest report, the TRC stressed that amnesty shouldn't be seen as promoting impunity, but the failure to investigate and prosecute has allowed this because, as you said, the passage of time has allowed very important witnesses and perpetrators to pass away, effectively eliminating the possibility of prosecutions in most of these cases. And so the heart of this issue is that people in the government need to be held accountable for denying survivors and victims and the families of apartheid crimes to be held to account for not allowing them their right to human dignity, their right to justice and closure.
Right. So the families of victims also want monetary compensation to help them fight their legal battles and to help memorialize their relatives. That's a fair ask, isn't it?
Very. The payment of constitutional damages would be to affirm their constitutional values and vindicate the rights of the applicants by supporting their pursuit for inquests, private prosecutions, and related litigation, as well as enabling commemoration, memorialization, and public education of the TRC. And this is also seen through an upcoming exhibition that we have with the Apartheid Museum, which will be open to the public on the 24th of September in Johannesburg.
Right. So is there any way, in your opinion, that South Africa can move on from its apartheid past without prosecuting these cases?
That's a very good question. And I mean, the reality is a lot of these cases won't be able to have prosecutions because of the deaths of persons of interest. And so now this constitutional damages case is another way of finding out the truth of the suppression, and also for families to have some sort of truth-seeking in terms of these, and knowing why the primary cases weren't investigated and pushed as they should have been many decades ago. We have a lot of inquests here at the Foundation for Human Rights, and we found that those are another avenue for families to find closure and justice. But the question of negotiating with our past is a very contentious one.
Right. Look, I can't help but notice how young you are compared to me. You should see my face. I have all this gray hair in my beard. What does seeking justice and accountability mean to you as a young South African?
This goes back to the situation of impunity. I would like our state officials to be able to be held account, and for us to not have to inherit past social ills and bring them into the present and into the future for future generations, because not dealing with the past holistically, substantially, and properly allows for such cases. And so as a young person, I think we need to deal with the past in order to understand why our present is the way it is. As you know, South Africa deals with a lot of social ills, and the culture of impunity is rampant. And at the heart of that is also these TRC cases. And so for me, this is an important step in moving forward as a country, is dealing with the past meaningfully and in the right way for many people, including victims and survivors of human rights violations.
Right. Well said. Siseitu Holomisa from the Foundation for Human Rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, prominent activist Steve Biko was one of the many targets of the apartheid government. As founder of the Black Consciousness Movement, he urged Black South Africans to resist white minority rule and reclaim pride after centuries of oppression. In 1977, at just 30 years old, Biko died in police custody. Thousands turned out for his funeral, singing songs of freedom. His death sparked outrage across South Africa and around the world. Yet to this day, no one has been prosecuted for their involvement in Biko's death. Police first claimed Biko fatally injured himself by hitting his head against a wall. But in the post-apartheid years, officers admitted they had assaulted him. Now, nearly 5 decades later, South Africa has reopened a judicial inquiry into his death. I am now joined by Kosinati Biko, the son of anti-apartheid activist Steve Biko. Hello, Kosinati. Thank you very much for joining us. Your father is seen as a hero in South Africa, no doubt. You were only 6 when he died. How do you remember your father?
Well, thank you for inviting me. Indeed, I was 6 and a half when he died. That was in 1977, in September. And therefore, the memories, direct memories that I have of him are from my formative years. And without fail, the one that stands out for me is when he taught me to fly my first kite. I suspect that over the years, I've come to make of that as a useful analogy, that parents, there is an ultimate duty, it is to teach their children to fly high in the world. So I do hold on to that memory as a very special memory.
Right. That's a beautiful memory. Comparing that beauty to what's been going on over the decades after his death is something I want to really find out right now. No one has been prosecuted after nearly 50 years. How does that make you feel?
Indeed. Steve Biko was arrested, a very healthy man, and he died of massive brain hemorrhage. He had been tortured, and the evidence for that is in the forensic report, and the scars on his body. We went through many iterations of attempts to get some truth out of those that killed him, including an inquest in 1977, We also went through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1997, 20 years old. My mother was 30 when all of this happened. She's now almost 80. And so there's a sense of injustice in only dealing with this matter so many years later.
How confident are you and your family that a new inquest into his death will lead to the prosecution of those responsible?
Well, you have to understand the latest development in the context of attempts by not only our family, but several families, about 35 of them, that have been pushing the South African government to follow through with inquests as well as prosecutions of more than 300 cases that were referred by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1999 for inquiry, alternatively prosecution. So these families have been working together, and this is probably the 11th or so of the inquest that is coming through. We have a good sense in the Biko case because of the earlier inquest and the Truth Commission of what happened in room 619 when they tortured him. And so ours is not as hidden as many of these other cases. One does hope that, of course, it will lead to the correct finding. In South Africa, if you don't die of a natural cause, there ought to be an investigation into your death.
Right.
And in the case of Biko, we have survivors, and they have never accounted for what they did to him in that room.
What will it really mean to you and your family to see someone prosecuted for the death of your father? Will that bring the closure and the justice you seek?
I guess when you deal with death, there can never be a sense of ultimate justice, because ultimate justice is impossible to bring alive the dead. What matters to us is that, not just in the Biko case, that in the entire portfolio of cases of victims of torture and death in detention, as well as those who were politically assassinated, that this nation accounts for those heroes. If you go to all of them, the official explanation of their death is that they killed themselves, that they died by suicide. And I don't think that we can successfully transition from our past to a productive future in this country without accounting for the pain of our past. The reason the world is so ambivalent to the suffering of others is when we overlook instances like this. And we attach value to one form or color of life and not another.
Right.
And so it's very, very important that we deal with that. But our sense of healing extends well beyond just the judicial processes. It's also about seeing this nation on the correct trajectory, the very reason that they gave up their lives. We have a successful nation.
If your father was alive today, what would he say about today's South Africa?
Well, he would say very little before I give him a massive hug. But I suspect that when he attends to an assessment of where we are, he would be obviously happy that there is a semblance of democracy. And indeed, in South Africa, we can express ourselves freely about any matter under the sun, as we should in democracies. And in that respect, I think we are more mature than some of the alleged leaders in democracy. But I do think that there are structural issues that have held and trapped many South Africans, such that they have not seen the promise of 1994, freedom in 1994. People who still are in the depth of despair and hopelessness, such as we saw prior to our political freedom.
Right. Kusinati Biko, son of anti-apartheid activist Steve Biko. Thank you very much.